my name's Sarah Purnell. I'm going to be showing you work over the last 5 years or so. And this body of work starts with a series of drawings where I begin to feel like I'm making work for the first time outside of the academic realm. I'm making work that is based more in my own narratives. You're going to see, as I continue to make work and as I continue to look at other people's art and ingest life experiences, I'm discovering more and more that my work is more or less about the same thing. It's about human experience, it's about the connection and disconnection of relationships, it's about loss, and about processing all of these things. You're going to see a lot of different mediums. I work in drawings, paintings, sculpture, and video. It's very important for me to describe myself as an interdisciplinary artist. Working in different mediums helps me problem solve. It helps me explore an idea in multiple ways so I can see it from different vantage points. And oftentimes I will make a little world in a painting or in a drawing and feels like it falls flat, and I want to see it as an object or as a media piece. And so it keeps me excited and engaged in what I'm doing. So these first slides were made in 2006, and as I said before, this was the first body of work where I felt like I was really making something substantial. I had been drawing my whole life. I've been making a lot of paintings and drawings in art school that were very academic, a lot of figure painting, a lot of still lives and things like this. And I left school and moved to a rural town in Western France where I had a studio and I was working with other artists, and I was thinking so much about being dislocated and being a foreigner and not being able to verbalize very, very simple things. So I began making these paintings sort of trying to describe this feudal nature of what it was like to try to communicate these very simple things. And I've sort of realized that my work continues to talk about that feeling of that disconnect. Also, it's important to note that the work kind of always teeters between being hopeful and feudal, between being happy and sad. And I think that's in that line that I'm really interested in, that liminal space between these two extreme emotions. I think it's a space that we exist mostly in our lives. So I'm making and they're flashcards. They're large, but they're shaped like flashcards. They're oil on paper. And so as I'm making these, I start making these like little tiny cardboard cutout figures. So these are about 4 inches tall. And they're cut out and then adhered directly onto the wall. I really wanted to think about painting outside of this traditional picture plane format. I wanted to think about painting as sculpture. I wanted to think about the playfulness of moving things around, not being fixed at all. So I'm making these like sort of strange little narratives. These figures are hopeless in their tiny activities, like riding a bike without clothes on, or hunting in the garden, which is right by the tree, or washing dishes in the bathtub. And so they're funny and they're sad, and also the materials become very important. This piece is really important for me because it made me think about breaking that picture plane format of traditional painting and drawing, thinking about the wall as space, trying to begin to think about an environment, although it falls flat. And then the materials become really important. They're humble. It's cardboard and child's paint. There's a simplicity to it that feels very important to me. Here's a little detail of that. So again, they're like this big. And titles are very important. I cannot hear you. Can you speak a little softer? It's sort of funny. It's poetic. So I come back from France and I start. These are the first paintings I make in the make in my studio. Again, there's sort of this like tutorial theme, like I'm trying to teach somebody something or trying to remember these things that I've been taught as an adult, trying to remember them as an adult. And I'm continuing to think about that cutting, having these cutouts and thinking about painting, not in this picture plane, but thinking about it as an environment. So I make these life-size cutouts, these figures. Again, there's this sort of strange, open-ended, nonsensical narrative that I'm hinting at. These come off the wall a little bit, maybe like 4 or 5 inches. They're life-size. So I'm making these, and I make a bunch of them, like a whole bunch. And I'm only showing you 2, or this one piece. And I'm making them, and I'm just not feeling like they're enough of a space. I feel like it's a painting. I feel like I'm just I'm putting these figures on the wall, and I'm wanting to break away from that picture plane, but I'm just reinforcing it and having the whole wall be the picture plane rather than, you know, the frame of the painting or the drawing. So I start looking at artists who are trying to think about painting in a non-traditional way. So I'm looking at them, and I start becoming really obsessed with the Mission School. So a group of artists working in the 1990s in the Mission in San Francisco. Their work is about, you know, DIY culture. Their work is about skateboarding and surfing and graffiti and all of these things that I'm participating in my life. They're the first artists that I felt like took their work very seriously, but didn't take themselves very seriously. And ultimately, they were making work that they wanted to see, and they were making work that their friends wanted to see. And I felt really inspired by that. So I'm looking at Barry McGee. I'm looking at Margaret Kilgallen, who I have been thinking about ever since. The first time I saw her paintings and her installations, I was totally struck with the beauty and the sort of pathetic nature of these figures, but they're also so strong, and this strange tension between having them be these like sort of hopelessly sad figures, but they're the heroine of this story, of these epics that she's creating. I'm loving the way she's using text and how she integrates sculpture and wall painting and traditional painting and typography and all of these things. And I'm also sort of enthralled with the myth that she's become, dying at a young age and sacrificing herself because she had cancer and she got pregnant and she refused chemotherapy because it would kill her child, and she died 2 weeks after her baby was born. And so the myth of her became sort of, I felt like she became like one of these heroines in her paintings. So I sort of become obsessed with her work ever since. I'm also, here's another piece by her. So you can see these characters, they're funny, they're strange, there's a crudeness to it that I really, that really resonates with me. I'm also looking at Chris Johansson. So this painting is like, there's like 4 paintings sort of stacked together, so these paintings become sculptural even though they're these like flat surfaces. So they're trying to use this group of people trying to think about painting in this new way. So I began to try to take that into my studio. So I'm making these like life-size cutouts still. I'm still thinking about this like strange and obscure narrative. And I'm trying to think about an environment, but I'm still not there. I'm like getting there. I'm moving towards this place I want to be, but I don't feel like I'm quite there yet. These 2 pieces go together, or we're in the same space. This is a life-size cutout, paintings on the wall, and then a light projection with a overhead projector. And so again, there's that overhead projector is that like idea of this like childhood classroom, this like tutorial, like all the materials for me are really important. Here's a detail of that. So it's just graphite on wood. So I'm making these paintings, and there's this narrative that's kind of that's behind all of the work, and I'm feeling like maybe the work is becoming too narrative, that the narrative is limiting me. So I start thinking about, what am I trying to say? What am I trying to talk about? What sort of metaphors can I use? And the idea of the amputated limb, or the disembodied body, the disembodied figure, starts to become really important, and I start thinking about it a lot. And this is the first piece that begins to talk about that disembodied figure, and you're going to see that thread sort of change throughout the next slides, and it moves from talking about the figure, but then talking about nature and that disembodied object. So this is an engraving. It's very small. It's about 5 inches tall. I was making a lot of prints too at this time. I make a lot all the time, so I'm not showing you everything, but at the same time that I was making all of those big paintings and those installations, I was making a whole lot of prints, and it makes sense for me to make prints because I'm interested in the democracy of printmaking, and that sort of the humble nature of it in some ways. So then I start grad school, and I have this thread of thought with these disembodied figures, and I know what I want to talk about, but I don't know how I want to talk about it. And so I just start drawing, and drawing for me is problem solving. It helps me think. So I just start making a lot of drawings. So these next slides it's like a thought process. It's like looking at my diary. It's like thinking, it's looking at this way that I'm trying to get somewhere, and I can't figure out exactly where it is. And so I just start making these drawings, and I'm making all these figures. I don't really know how I feel about them. I'm still thinking about text in some ways. And so, so I'm making these drawings, I'm using this figure, and the figure is just feeling so limiting for me. And so I start thinking about nature. And I'm in Massachusetts, and I'm from a city, and that first body of work that I felt like I was making that was like really substantial. I was in a rural setting. I'm in a rural setting again. I'm spending a lot of time outside. And I start really thinking about these trees and the relationship that the leaves have with the tree itself, and thinking about the autonomy of the fallen leaf, and the idea that as soon as it has its freedom, it begins to decompose, it begins to die. And that metaphor seemed really exciting for me. And it seemed like what I was talking about with the figure. The figure, there's something with seeing like a stump. There's something sort of grotesque about that. I don't want them to be grotesque. I want them to be sort of sweet and interesting, and have a sort of playfulness, and that amputated figure just wasn't right for me. And so then I start thinking about these amputated limbs that are these tree leaves, and so I start making this project, and this project's called I'm Thinking of You. I started it in 2008, and it is an ongoing project. I have hundreds of these leaves, and I sew when I have no ideas in the studio, because it's true. Sometimes we don't have ideas. Sometimes it's hard, and sometimes I don't want to be in my studio at all. And when I don't want to be in my studio, I sit at my sewing machine and I sew. And I am meditating, and I'm doing this repetitive I'm making this repetitive motion, and I am thinking about everything, and I'm thinking about nothing, and it is the most fertile ground for me to be in. And so it's actually sort of exciting. I kind of like love it when I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to paint. I just guess I'm going to start sewing. And the materials, again, are very important to me. So I'm constantly thinking about how content or concept and form come together, and I really feel like the form needs to support your content, and so the act of sewing becomes like the act of healing. The repetitive motions are like meditation. The materials are blankets and sheets that I forge from my thrift store hunting adventures and from tag sales and from free piles. And the bed sheets talk about that intimacy that I'm experiencing while I'm having these meditative processes through making the work. Here are some details. This project exists in many different formats. Sometimes they're suspended, sometimes they're hooked onto the wall, adhered to the wall. There's writing sometimes involved. Sometimes they exist in piles. And so about the time that I'm making this work, so I've started making these leaf drawings, or these leaf sculptures, and I'm getting away from the figure, and I go to Mass MoCA, and I see this show called Badlands, New Horizons in Landscape, and I am blown away with the way that landscape begins to read as a human experience. And I get the catalog and I read it all the way through like 10 times, and I'm really excited about all these paintings, and I'm really feeling like landscape makes sense in the way that we project our bodies onto the landscape, in the way that landscape is scarred by trauma in the same way that we're scarred by trauma. So I'm thinking a lot about this. I'm from Indiana, and I'm thinking a lot about these trees that exist in between my home and my parents' home. That this group of trees had been hit by a tornado twice in 1 year, and they're totally mangled. And you'll see once you start seeing some of these paintings of trees I make, they don't look like real trees. They sort of look make-believe, but they're trees based off of this group of trees that I see on my drive from my house to my parents' house in Indiana. I'm so interested in the way that they continue to grow, and yet they've been scarred, and I feel like, oh, that's like my tragedy. You know, I continue to produce, but I'm producing in this way that is disconnected from what I was originally. And so I think that was, it became really interesting for me, and it became easier for me to talk about some hard things in my work because there was this like level of being removed. By removing the figure, I felt a lot of freedom in the things that I could discuss in the work. So I'm making this, I'm making these self-sculptures, and I start making these drawings based off of it, and I've sort of like kind of touched upon the underlining personal issues within the work, or the personal narratives, and they're there, and I want them to be there, but I also don't want them to overshadow a sort of universal narrative. But it felt very important to make these drawings, because when I'm making these leaves, I was thinking about a very specific incident. When I moved to Massachusetts, well, my family's small and disjointed the way that I feel like all contemporary families really are in some ways. And one of my brothers lives in New Mexico, and I'd moved to Massachusetts, and I hadn't talked to him in several years, and he grew very ill when I moved to Massachusetts, and so I started making the leaves and started making these drawings of him while he was in this coma for 2 months, and I never visited him. And I think a lot of the work since then has been about the guilt that I feel about that disconnect of human relationships, that the way that we fail as a people. So I'm making these, and again, these titles are really important. I'd give my lungs to someone who would forget it was a gift. So I'm also making these videos, and so this is the first video that I begin to make. The first video that I make, and it's a performance. It's a 2-hour-long performance where I'm cutting onions, and I feel so funny showing this video to people because it's hard for me to watch. I'm actually really glad that the sound's not working because the sound is pretty sad and awful, and it's much nicer to talk and have you watch the moving image than hearing me. But so I'm making this work again all in response to these this idea of tragedy, this idea of trying to move past something. But I'm also thinking about there being humor in it, because I think that, like, again, that's the point. We straddle this world between things being fun and things being sad. And they're actually synonymous emotions to me. Oftentimes, when I feel very upset, I want to watch a funny movie because laughing is the same. It has the same feeling as crying without the guilt of crying, and so I like the humor in this piece, and I like the way that I'm thinking about it relating to pop culture. So I'm definitely thinking about MTV's The Real World and their confessional booths, and that idea of this sort of I'm telling you what's happening in my life, but it is you're being prompted to do that. And so in that same way of being prompted, I'm prompting myself to feel this extreme emotion through that process of cutting these onions. I'm thinking about history. I'm thinking about the history of performance, and the history of video.
That was fascinating that you said that sometimes when you're sad that you would, think of something like either funny. And I was just thinking, well, what about, is it possible for the opposite to happen? What if you're happy? Is it then when you can tackle really hard, sad things?
Yeah.
When you're happy, but not vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those two things are things that I think about. I live in those two extreme emotions, and can only, and you're right, like sort of only reflect upon one or the other. Yeah. And so this piece is like sad and funny, and uncomfortable, and I liked all of that. So it was the first it was the first video that I made. I put this, and I'm still making a lot of drawings. Again, drawing is a way that I'm thinking through things. And so as I'm making all of this work, I'm also reading a lot of text, and I start reading Poetics of Space, and I've read it 100 times now, and I never understand it, and I always understand it, and it is dense, and with chapters like nests and shells, the phenomenology of roundness. What is the other chapters that I read all the time? The dialectics of outside and inside. This text becomes really important in the way that I think about my work. I love a couple of these quotes, and I think about them a lot. I love this Blanchard quoting this Van den Berg quote, which is, "We're continuously living a solution of problems that reflection cannot hope to solve," which I feel is a direct relationship to the desire to make these things all the time. I'm thinking, and in this quote, "The questions abound. How can secret rooms that have disappeared, become abodes for an unforgettable past? Not only our memories, but the things we have forgotten are housed. Our soul is an abode." So I start making these paintings where I've completely taken out the figure, and there are these landscapes. And they are sort of, these boxes become like disembodied objects in a way. They're empty, they're flat, so there's within each of those empty boxes there's this complete flat black, so you can't see anything that's inside of it. So that void becomes this presence, which I'm interested in, which is part of the reason that I'm interested in that amputated limb, that the void of this limb, you become more and more, you realize its presence after its absence. And I think that's interesting, and that's the same that's parallel to that idea of our human relationships. Like, I don't understand the presence of my brother until he's absent from me. And so now you can see how I start getting obsessed in my little world, and I make these paintings, and I'm like, oh, it falls flat. I want to see it. I want to see it be an actual thing. So I start making them. And I'm making these paintings, trying to figure something out, and this is that rest period for me. So this is that period of time where I'm like trying to get into a body of work. I'm working towards it, and it's just not quite there. And so all of these drawings become this thought process for me. And I begin making some more videos. So I'm interested in this sort of never-ending, mindless game that is this way that I'm connecting with this other person. Remember.
Make it into an endless loop, or did you just keep doing it?
It stops, like here. It stops with the text. But in a gallery setting, it would just completely, it would be on a loop. So I'm making more drawings. The figure sort of comes back. And I start reading this book called Volatile Bodies by Elizabeth Gross. And this text becomes really, really, really important for me. She talks a lot about the phantom limb, and so again, feeling something's presence after its absence. She talks about that liminal space between these two realities, the idea that the phantom limb patient doesn't exist in the present, but doesn't exist in the past. They exist in this in-between space because two simultaneous realities are occurring at once. And I'm like, that's it. That's what I'm trying to talk about. That's where that landscape and abstraction and, you know, these weird shapes and this sort of semi-naturalistic or illustrative representation of the world, that's where these two spaces begin to collide for me. So I'm still making these drawings, I'm reading these texts, I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm also, while at the same time that I'm reading these like really theoretical texts, I'm reading, I'm looking at this group, this catalog from the show, and reading the essays in it that are all about craft. so it's like strange that I'm reading this, really, really, really dense text, and then this text that is really, really fun and easy and exciting, and talks about craft as process, and about how it's a way to think, and about how important it is for us to work with our hands, and about how if we work with our hands, we're not talking about this sort of like global, anonymous distribution of items, but we're talking about something local, we're talking about something personal, we're talking about something that is tangible in this really personal way. And so it's funny to me that these two, that these texts are sort of working together for me. And I start sewing again. I start making these pieces, and it's like similar to the way that I'm thinking about those leaves, where I'm just like grabbing blankets and sheets from the thrift store and being like, I like this color, I like this color, and I'm in my studio because my drawings are just feeling like they're going nowhere, and I start sewing again, and quickly this becomes this. And so this is big, maybe like 15 feet tall by, I don't know, 30, 40 feet wide. I have some slides, some more slides of it. It's like flayed skin to me, so it's like bark, but it's like flayed bark. It's also like bodies, it's like fingers, it's like insides. It's strangely sweet because they're like baby blankets kind of, but it's also completely grotesque. It's inside outside, so there's like it, and it's expansive and myopic. So it's like all these things for me. And again, so this abstract world and this sort of realistic world, they're talking about the dual realities. You see these shapes that are like these like bubbly shapes sort of all the time in the work. They're like fluids a little bit. They're sort of sweet, but they're also sort of gross. Here's another one of these paintings. Oh, and these paintings are really big too. So they're like, I don't know. This is casein. So this is, casein on Luan board. So casein's like a milk-based paint. And I became really in love with the material of casein because has the sort of like fluidity of oil paints, but the flatness of gouache, and the mattness of gouache, and they smell like hay. And so it's so beautiful to like be in the presence of the painting, and they're like lush too, like the material. There's this like this really beautiful quality of the paint, and if you can buff it, which I think is really strange and wonderful. It's like 5 feet by 6 feet or 4 feet by 5 feet. So they're fairly large paintings. It was funny though, it's interesting, like for me, like I'm continually questioning my own work, and I'm continually wanting more from my own work, and I think that that's good. I think that if I felt satisfied that I would not want to be making it, I would feel like I was done. I think that's the point, and we're like working towards something. But I put these paintings in the gallery, and in my little studio they looked giant, and I was so excited by them. And then the minute they got into the gallery, I was like, these are so gem-like. They're these like tiny little things. So in a perfect world, I would go back and make them larger. So then this is another piece from it. I have some slides of this, some details of this, because this piece is like very atmospheric, and it's a lot about layering these paints. So here are a couple slides. So you can see that even though that seems like a pretty flat space, there's a lot of things happening. So that work finished. So I was making those painting, the sculptures and those paintings of the forest in 2010, and I finished that body of work in like April of 2010. Then I moved to New York, and I hated it, and then I moved here, and I feel pretty finished with that body of work, and so I'm sort of like in that weird space again where I'm making all these drawings and I don't know what I'm doing, and I think I have an idea, but it's not quite formulated quite yet. And then I make this video, which I made like a month ago. And this video is funny because it's called The End, which is the end of this presentation, but it's also the beginning of a new body of work for me. So I'm really excited about next semester or a year from now, and the possibility of having this talk again with this whole new body of work that sort of begins at the end, which I think is sweet. And so one quick thing about this video, and I kind of want, maybe I should have said it before, is like, my work is a little funny. Like, so there is a chuckle in this, and I welcome that chuckle. I think that that's important. That's my website and my YouTube channel, which you should look at because I'm always posting funny videos. No, not funny, serious videos, serious art videos is what I'm posting all the time on YouTube. Yeah, so that's that.